So I saw Blade Runner 2049 and I thought it was pretty cool. It managed to strike a balance of staying true to the 1982 original while telling a new story and finding its own identity. It's probably the smartest mainstream film to be released all year. Even though the film wasn't a huge box office success, it was a hit with critics and it was well received by its audience. Well, I guess not everyone in the audience liked it. You see, it doesn't matter how good or acclaimed a movie is, there will always be some contrarian asshole out there who's more than willing to tell you why a great movie is actually a pile of shit. Which brings us to my main man, Razorfist. Maybe you can't tell by looking at him, but he's the kind of guy who tries really hard to be different. Razor's the type of dude who would corner you at a party, then talk your ear off all night about how Final Fantasy VII is actually overrated garbage, then in his next breath proceed to tell you how the Star Wars prequels are secretly great movies. So, obviously after Blade Runner 2049 received almost universal praise, old Razor couldn't help himself. He had to take to the internet and make a video telling everybody why they were wrong for liking it. So let's go through that video and see if he's really making some good arguments or just spitting out pointless drivel.
Let's rap about Gosling for a beat, shall we? I mean, it was all well and good in my first rant about the trailer for this movie to cut a few yucks at his expense, talking about his wonky-ass eyeballs, or how Hollywood seemingly flipped a switch at random and decided the bitch from Breaker High was suddenly leading man material, when his actual acting talent is outstripped by the average underwear model turned actor on the C-fucking-W. Look, you're a producer. You're casting a sequel to the definitive future noir, something this movie also lacks in spades, but we'll get to that in a fucking minute. You have your choice of a gravel, gargling, downbeat protagonist. Maybe a hard ass, a wise ass, a lesser actor with Marlboro Man good luck. You know, fuck it. Let's go with the wall-eyed chameleon looking fuck who regularly confuses acting with looking like you're holding in a shit and whose Canadian accent is thicker than freeze-dried marmalade. Because that's what I need to hear tumbling from the maw of my world-weary cyber cop lead. A Ned fucking Flanders accent. Oakley dokley do, Sharino.
I find the opening of this video baffling. Danny Boy is literally complaining about the looks of the lead actor. He has a problem with Ryan Gosling's eye, and he bemoans the fact they cast Gosling instead of a quote, graveling, gargling hard ass with Marlboro Man good looks. I don't know about you, but unlike Razorfist, I'm not going to the movies to ogle hunky guys. I go to the movies because I want to see a good story with good acting. And Gosling's a good actor. He shows a lot of vulnerability in Half Nelson. He has great comedic range in The Nice Guys, and in Drive, he did that less is more thing with a very understated performance. Actually, Gosling's performance in Blade Runner 2049 is very similar to his performance in Drive. Granted, Gosling's character K isn't as reserved as the driver, but he does play the role with an unflinching calmness, which is an excellent choice. The thing we have to remember about the style of the original Blade Runner is the art direction and set design was responsible for setting a lot of the atmosphere. Blade Runner 2049 continues this approach. Gosling's acting choices are very subtle and very deliberate because he's allowing the atmosphere to inform his performance. The demeanor of Gosling's character Officer K is very consistent with the tone of the film, and he feels like a character who was born in this world. In the hands of a different actor, like say Leonardo DiCaprio, you would run the risk of the character being too intense. If you were to put someone like DiCaprio in the role of Officer K, you would risk the possibility of the performance being too flashy and distracting from the movie. So Gosling's performance serves the character and story well, and when he does explode with emotion, you can't help but take notice, because by downplaying certain scenes, he's made the emotional outburst that much more important.
Really, that's what this film suffers from in its entirety. The complete absence of a compelling antagonist. Stevie Blunder over there doesn't have a dickish thought till the third fucking act of the film, and Yoga Pants McResting Bitchface murders half that county and is still only mildly annoying. Rutger Hauer stole the entire goddamn movie. Jared Leto couldn't steal an episode of Captain Kangaroo.
Stevie Wonder and Captain Kangaroo? How old is this motherfucker? Okay, I get he's trying to be irreverent, but maybe he should try to keep his references consistent with the century he's living in. opinion. Alright, so I do have to agree with Grandpa Fist that neither Jared Leto's Wallace or Sylvia Hoek's Love live up to Rutger Hauer's portrayal of Roy Batty. But let's be honest. With the exception of Hauer, all the other replicant characters in the original Blade Runner were completely forgettable. Leon and Pris were just plot devices, and Zora didn't have a purpose at all. She just got dressed, ran down the street, and got shot. Rather than make the mistake of trying to create a new Roy Batty type character, Blade Runner 2049 rather wisely takes the two sides of Batty's personality, the tough brute and introspective philosopher, and splits them into two characters, which is actually more in line with classic film noir. Most film noirs have the boss character and the enforcer. Out of the Past had Wit and Joe, The Big Combo had Mr. Brown and Fanty, The Maltese Falcon had Gutman and Wilmer, so following that tradition, Blade Runner 2049 has Wallace and Love. Leto's Wallace character is actually similar to Gutman in The Maltese Falcon. They both play their roles with an unwavering assertiveness that make them the focal point of their respective scenes. Now recently, hating on Jared Leto has become the cool thing to do, which is understandable. I mean, he was like the worst Joker ever, and believe me, I'm no fan of Leto myself, but I do think he does a good job as Wallace. You most certainly could accuse him of overdoing it and calling too much attention to his performance, but I think his choices work, because in contrast to Gosling's performance as Kay, the character of Wallace lends itself to a more flashy acting style. Leto's Wallace is a billionaire who has cornered the market in replicant production. In order for Wallace to have achieved his status as the head of a multinational corporation, he would need to have a commanding personality. If Leto played the character with more subtlety, you would run the risk of the Wallace character coming off as flat. Also, Wallace doesn't have a lot of screen time, so the fact that Leto makes very bold acting choices allows his character to stand out, making Wallace's presence felt throughout the entire film, even though he only appears in a handful of scenes. And quite frankly, even if you hate Leto, you have to respect the fact that he never phones it in. He's consistently trying to give an interesting performance. Some people might think I'm crazy for saying this, but even though Rutger Hauer gives a better performance as Roy Batty, I think Sylvia Hoek's Love is a better character. Here's why. Some people might describe Love as the true antagonist of 2049, but that wouldn't be accurate. Love isn't Kay's adversary, she's his foil. Love and Kay are basically the same character, and another interesting nuance is Gosling and Hoek are playing these characters almost exactly the same. Both of them have an inhuman calmness and will occasionally explode with bursts of anger. They are also both replicants following orders from an overbearing master. While Kay begins to question his orders, Love consistently remains loyal. When Razor says the biggest problem with the film is it lacks a solid antagonist, it shows how he doesn't understand Blade Runner 2049 or the original film. Roy Batty wasn't the antagonist of Blade Runner. The movie wasn't building to some final showdown of Deckard and Roy facing off. The antagonist of Blade Runner is the character's own limitation. In the original film, every character had a flaw they had to deal with. The replicants wanted to extend their life expectancy. J.F. Sebastian couldn't live on the outer colonies because of his condition. Rachel didn't want to be defined by the fact she was a replicant. Deckard basically lost interest in society and became an alcoholic. The resolution of the film isn't Deckard and Roy overcoming each other. The resolution is the characters overcoming their personal demons. Roy learns to accept his inevitable death, and Deckard learns to stop drinking himself to death and lives out the rest of his days with Rachel. So keeping with the themes of the original film, the antagonist of Blade Runner 2049 isn't Wallace or Love. The antagonist of Blade Runner 2049 is freedom, or rather, the lack of freedom. Kay and Love are trapped by being controlled by their superiors. Deckard is trapped because he must remain in hiding to keep his daughter safe. Officer K, over the course of the film, manages to take control of his own life, setting Deckard free and in a way freeing himself. Love, on the other hand, shuns her freedom and continues to obey Wallace, which is what leads to her death. The fact that Love is the antithesis of Kay is what makes her a strong character. Rutger Hauer had a lot of charisma as Roy Batty, but the character himself was poorly handled in the story. Roy and Deckard relate to each other tangentially. Even Roy's meeting with Tyrell is anticlimactic. They should have a father-son bond, but it's non-existent. Roy learns to accept his death, but we don't know why. He just does. This is why I think Love is a better character than Roy. As a pure foil for Kay, it makes the character's journey more logical, and it makes her motivations more interesting.
That's your masterful motherfucking writing. That's what you no-taste have and animal-loving dipshits, weaned as you all were on the latent inferiority of Blade Runner as interpreted by the Japanese, are spurging the fuck out at me on Twitter about. That shit? Are you on this earth?
Hey, you've been getting on fine without one.
What's that, madam?
A soul.
Greatest sequel of all time, ladies and gentlemen.
This is just intellectual dishonesty. He's just playing clips out of context. I can do that too.
You better get it up. I'm gonna have to kill you.
The scene with Kay and the captain is actually a really great moment, and it actually marks the starting point of Kay's character arc.
Fuck on the nose, this dialogue is up it! We break company with the plot no less than 4 times over the course of this film, so Sped Flanders can chat up an often ancillary character and explain the story to that fucking point, which would be merely annoying in any other film, but in a sequel to Blade Runner, perhaps the most pronounced example in contemporary cinema of show-don't-tell storytelling, a movie where the strongest evidence for Deckard's replicantastic subtext came in the form of a fuzzy, out-of-focus, background shot 90% of the audience blinked and fucking missed. This dialogue is a fucking affront to the Blade Runner legacy.
Can we retire this show don't tell bullshit? Is there some clause in the YouTube terms of service that states at some point every hack reviewer has to yell show don't tell into the camera?
Okay, Daniel-san, the reason none of the characters comment on that blurry shot that hints Deckard might be a replicant is because, as you said, it's subtext. Do you not know the difference between plot and subtext? Plot describes the narrative and subtext describes the ideas. If the characters talked about Deckard being a replicant, it would stop being subtext and it would become part of the plot. The reason there isn't a lot of exposition in the original Blade Runner is because there isn't a need for any. It's the biggest failing of the original, and it's the core problem every fan, myself included, has with the original film. The story sucks. The reason the subtext of the original film stands out is because there isn't a narrative to get in the way. Bryant tells Deckard he has to hunt down and retire the rogue replicants, and that's it. Nothing else happens. There are no twists and there are no turns. It's just a guy walking around till replicants show up. In the absence of a traditional story, all you can do is sit back, listen to the music, and take in the scenery. People describe the original Blade Runner as being a film noir, but it's actually only half a film noir. See, there are 2 defining aspects of film noir. One of them is the aesthetic, using shadows and smoke to create atmosphere, which is an aspect Blade Runner captures very well. The other signature aspect of noir, and arguably the most important aspect, is that it's a mystery story. This is why noir transcends film and there are noir books, because a key tenet of a noir story is that it's a gritty, urban-based mystery. This was the problem with the original Blade Runner. There was no mystery to solve. Harrison Ford criticized his own character's lack of detective abilities, saying, "I was a detective who did not have any detecting to do." Blade Runner 2049 follows the template of a film noir more so than its predecessor. Judging from Razorfist's comments, I think it's safe to say he's never actually seen a film noir, nor does he even know what defines film noir. The protagonist trying to solve a mystery, then learning they're a pawn in a greater puzzle, all while trying to evade an enigmatic adversary, is the core of most noir stories. In The Big Combo, Lieutenant Diamond is trying to find out the identity of a woman known as Alicia, all while trying to elude the villainous Mr. Brown. In Out of the Past, P.I. Jeff Bailey is trying to find the whereabouts of the mysterious Kathy Moffat while being pursued by the powerful Whit Sterling. So Kay's search to solve the mystery of Deckard's child while being targeted by the Wallace Corporation is very much an archetype of classic film noir. The foundation of Blade Runner 2049 is built upon a mystery, so understandably, the film requires the characters to engage in expository dialogue. On Kay's journey to find Deckard's offspring, he finds clues and discusses his findings with the other characters. There's even a twist where Kay thinks he might be the child of Deckard and Rachel. If the characters didn't discuss the meaning of Kay's finding, the audience wouldn't know what the fuck was going on. This is mystery writing 101. Characters discuss events in the plot to move the plot forward. There is no mystery in the original Blade Runner. Every detail you need to know about the plot happens in the first 20 minutes. By the end of the film, nothing you knew about the narrative has changed. The characters don't need to explain anything because everything is still the same. If Razorfist ever watched a film noir, he would have noticed that noir films are just a series of conversations. The Maltese Falcon, one of the prototypes of the film noir genre, is just people walking into rooms, lighting up a cigarette, and saying, "Where the fuck is the Maltese Falcon?"
And if Anita was pissed about Deckard force fucking a dishwasher, one can only speculate as to the cyclopean shitfit she'll throw when she ultimately catches wind of Special K and his portable pocket pussy, who between the Latin ancestry and omnipresent expository dialogue strikes me less as a fully fleshed out character and more as Dennis Villeneuve's waifu wish fulfillment. Fucking ringe!
Well, firstly, I don't give a shit what Anita Sarkeesian thinks, and shame on you for bringing that cunt up. The reason Joy doesn't strike you as a fleshed out character is because she's not meant to be a fleshed out character. Joy is representative of the movie's theme of freedom. The audience is meant to question the motive behind Joy's love for Kay. Does she love him because she chooses to, or does she love him because she's programmed to? It's actually, as far as I'm concerned, one of the most interesting parts of the film. But I guess, Razorfist missed that because it's subtext. It's one thing to understand subtext when the director explains it in the audio commentary. It's another thing to figure it out for yourself.
These are the CGI visuals Screen Rant and the rest of you vajayjays are shrieking from the mountaintops, quote, "Never once look fake." Where's the grit? Where's the nighttime? Where's the texture, you tits? I mean, he crash lands in a garbage dump and it still looks too sleek. And here's a fucking query. Is lack of texture not attribute fucking 1 on the list of characteristics that define shitty CGI? It's shit! Shut up and admit it! It looks like a fucking video game in places, one that's often way too antiseptic and ass blast the atmosphere, texture, and tone of the original in the process.
This is when it becomes laughably clear Razorfist is an idiot. He shows 2 clips to evidence what he perceives as shitty CGI. One of them is a practical set, the other one is a miniature. Neither of them are CGI. The garbage dump Razor claims lacks texture was shot using a combination of miniatures and practical sets. The shots of the LAPD headquarters, the Wallace building, and Kay's apartment were all miniatures. The entire cityscape was a miniature set. This isn't even a CGI shot. This is a composite shot of 2 actors. Maybe I'm getting nitpicky with the language, but CGI refers to computer-generated imagery. There are CGI flourishes to this shot, like the digital matte painting in the background, but the last time I checked, Ryan Gosling and Ana de Armas were real people. In an effort to pay tribute to the original film, the effects team even used the same VFX techniques that were used in the original movie, such as using a motion-controlled camera to create multiple lighting passes of the miniature sets. I guess it's not surprising Razorfist can't tell the difference between CGI and practical effects. He is a guy who, after all, doesn't realize it might be a good idea to turn off the autofocus on his camera. Seriously, as soon as Stinkfist here starts harping on the movie's effects, we should just disregard everything he says. Whether you like the movie or not, you have to agree the VFX are outstanding. Razorfist's video is just contrarian bullshit. He can't say anything positive about the movie. He has to find fault with everything. Back when the trailer came out, he praised the visuals.
From the rain-drenched futurescapes of cyberpunk LA to the withered deserts of the Kipple beyond, they've certainly mastered the visual lexicon, if nothing else.
But that was back when there was still a question mark as to whether the film would be good or not. After the movie came out and was well received, Danny Boy couldn't help himself. He had to hate everything about the movie.
It really isn't fair to bitch about the effects in Blade Runner 2049 not being as innovative as the original. We live in an age where every movie has great effects. There really isn't room for improvement. Back in 1982, motion controllers and elaborate miniatures were the cutting edge of VFX technology. On top of that, no one had ever seen a cyberpunk cityscape in a movie before. Now, 30 plus years later, we've seen everything. From detailed miniatures to realistic CGI, there's nothing left to surprise us. We take it all for granted. It's like Jurassic Park. In 1993, the effects blew everyone away because they were new and nobody had ever seen digital dinosaurs before. Now, it doesn't matter how realistic you make a dinosaur, we're used to it. The novelty has worn off.
Compare Tyrell's bedchambers. Opulent, yes, spacious as well, but cluttered, stacked to the gills with irrelevant minutia. Now, compare that to Wallace HQ, where Villeneuve overcompensates for his sparse set design by ear-fucking the aquatic lighting effect Ridley Scott used in exactly 1 scene of the original until it lapses from odd but visually stimulating to "Hey Aquaman, shut your fucking nightlight off."
I can't help but wonder if Razorfist is just being willfully ignorant or he's just stupid. He's comparing Tyrell's bedroom in the original film with the hallways and offices of 2049. He actually wonders why there aren't any knickknacks in the Wallace building's hallway. Maybe because it's a fucking hallway? What do you expect to see in the hallway? A goddamn jungle gym? Actually, a better parallel for Tyrell's bedroom isn't Wallace's office, it's the hotel Deckard made his home. The reason the hotel is full of old Vegas show equipment is because it symbolizes Deckard's present state. The same way Tyrell was just as opulent and frivolous as the trinkets that adorned his room, the artifacts in the hotel showed Deckard to be a washed-up relic of the past.
Even Grand Moff Rachel over here. That bitch was doing somersaults at the base of the uncanny valley.
Again, more contrarian bullshit. The Rachel scene had some of the best face replacement effects I've ever seen.
Vilineueve, may I politely inquire what prompted your 20-kilometer pulsating erection for Holograms exactly? The original film of which features nary a fucking one? But at least every underwhelming microsecond of the film in question will be scored by the Vangelis value, but I'm sorry, Hans Zimmer. But who couldn't have guessed that fact when the film is festooned with French horn farts?
He doesn't like the movie now because it has holograms in it. This is just becoming nonsensical. He's literally making the point, movie bad because holograms. Actually, when you think about it, given the futuristic technology of the original film, that movie should have had holograms in it too. I think the holograms in 2049 are pretty cool. And by using the holograms, Vilineueve manages to reference the original billboards without directly copying them. I do have to agree with Razorfist though on the issue of the soundtrack. The soundtrack for Blade Runner 2049 fucking blows ass. The best part of the score is when the original Blade Runner theme kicks in.
So wait, you got the soundtrack wrong, you got the show don't tell storytelling wrong, got the aesthetic wrong, fuck, thanks to the outright removal of any and all noir elements in what is ostensibly a future fucking noir, you got the goddamn genre wrong, but greatest sequel ever, am I right? Absent those attributes, what do you have left? Fan service! And may I advance the radical suggestion that we could have done with considerably fucking less. It's hard enough watching Deckard bowleg about like a leathery penguin, wowing us with a world-class wardrobe job of jeans and a fucking t-shirt, but I think we all could have done without the crushing depression brought about by retirement home gaff.
This is the part of the video where if you were a robot trying to follow Razorfist's logic, your head would explode. For the past 5 minutes, Daniel-san has been bitching about Blade Runner 2049 being too different from the original. Every argument he makes is basically, Blade Runner 2049 sucks because they didn't do it the same way they did it in the original. The only criticism he can make about the holograms in 2049 is that the original movie didn't have holograms in it. So like a good little fanboy, he's outraged that the new movie is too different from the original. Then he makes the claim that the core problem with 2049 is that it's nothing but fan service.
Illogical. Please explain.
That logic doesn't make any sense at all. Harrison Ford doesn't show up till like the last third of the film. You could probably boil down his whole appearance to like 4 or 5 scenes. I don't understand why he has a problem with Gaff in a retirement home either. Where the hell else should he be? He's a fucking old man. Honestly, this is a no-win scenario with Razorfist. If they didn't put Gaff in the film, he would be complaining, oh, so Harrison Ford gets a cameo, but Edward James almost gets snubbed? And if Gaff wasn't in a retirement home and he was still working on the police force, he would bitch, why do they let a 70-year-old man still serve on the police force? Shouldn't he be in a retirement home? Quite frankly, Razorfist should welcome the sight of a retirement home. Those are the only people that are going to get his Captain Kangaroo references.
If Razor keeps using that logic, he might do something stupid, like fall for one of those pyramid schemes. Or even worse, he might do something crazy, like, I don't know, go to his friend's house and record himself masturbating.
And could we go ahead and stop blatantly lying and saying this film doesn't even vaguely address the question of Deckard's humanity? It not only addresses, but answers that question, and does so pretty emphatically. Look, if the core plot revolves around robots fucking other robots and pinching out robot babies, not humans and robots, mind you, no one would be freaking out if that were the case, because all you'd have to do is keep them segregated, not horses and replicants, and Coulter could do with a good pipe cleaning. The only way it's dangerous, and the only way this film has a plot, is if it's replicants and other replicants.
I cannot breathe it, so help me, I have tried.
Having accepted this fact, someone's gonna need to explain the fuck to me how the same film flipping the fuck out because Deckard fucked the shit out of Rachel and made a Fisher-Price robot is not basically shouting from the goddamn mountaintops that Deckard is a goddamn replicant.
Why, I'd be happy to explain it to you. It doesn't matter if two replicants fucked or a human fucked a replicant. What matters is that there's a child. Rachel is undeniably a replicant. The miracle is even though she was designed to be infertile, she was somehow able to get pregnant. A human and a replicant having a child isn't any less incredible than two replicants having a child, evidenced by the fact that a replicant has never given birth in this world before. Put simply, in the universe of Blade Runner, there's a lot of replicant fucking going on. Replicants are fucking humans, replicants are fucking other replicants, none of them are getting pregnant. One replicant with the ability to give birth is the key to all replicants having the ability to give birth. A replicant that could reproduce would be able to reproduce with a human. Also, you can take the replicant with the ability to give birth and reverse engineer it to give other replicants the ability to give birth. Rachel was the only replicant ever to get pregnant. That's what's important. That's why her child is so sought after. Whether the father was a replicant or not doesn't matter. That's why Deckard's humanity is still ambiguous. And the mere fact that you and I are disagreeing on how to interpret the film proves that it's still ambiguous.
Congrats on ripping off the plot to Children of Men, by the way, which was itself more than a bit of a Blade Runner ripoff. Which is probably what I find most disappointing about this film in general. Instead of paving a new path a la the original, it is inspired, and blatantly so, by movies that were themselves inspired by Blade Runner. I mean, you ever cringe when, for example, Dokken cut a record that was basically a bargain basement audio slave ripoff, or when Metallica cuts a fucking radio rock record? Well, you're repressing a dry heave for the exact same reason I consider Blade Runner 2049 a repugnant fucking insult. From short films by anime aficionados who've been butt-fucking the Blade Runner brand for their entire career.
It is pretty hilarious that a guy who stole his persona from Dennis Miller and dresses like Sum 41's parody of a metal band is ranting about people ripping off other people. First, let me dispel this myth. Blade Runner invented the urban cyberpunk aesthetic. If you watched my video on Blade Runner Blackout 2022, you'll remember I mentioned Ridley Scott was heavily influenced by French comic book artist Moebius. And by influence, I mean he unabashedly ripped off every detail from Moebius's comics. Ridley Scott handed his art department copies of Heavy Metal magazine and told them, I want the sets to look like this. The futuristic cityscapes everyone associates with Blade Runner is actually an invention of Moebius. Blade Runner isn't even the first movie to create a realistic sci-fi cityscape. That honor would go to Metropolis.
Every time Razorfist says Akira is a ripoff of Blade Runner, I can't help but feel embarrassed for him. The first issue of Akira was published in Weekly Young magazine on December 6, 1982. Blade Runner was released in Japan July 3rd of the same year. If Weekly Young magazine went on sale December 6th, that means the magazine had to have gone to the printer sometime in November. So given that timeline, in order for Katsuhiro Otomo to rip off Blade Runner, he would have had to have seen the movie in July, then he would have had to come up with the idea of Akira, plot out the story, pitch it to a publisher, write the first issue, illustrate the first issue, then have it approved by the publisher, all in a 3-month time span. Like Ridley Scott, Katsuhiro Otomo was influenced by Moebius's comic The Long Tomorrow.
Blade Runner most certainly popularized the cyberpunk aesthetic and in many ways defined it, but it didn't invent it. Like the original film, Blade Runner 2049 deals with similar themes about humanity and its relationship with technology. Being a heavy metal poser,
Radio edit.
being a heavy metal fan, Razorfist likes to use music analogies, so allow me to use one of my own. There are only 12 notes in music. Every song you hear is a different combination of those 12 notes. When you write a new song, you can't invent new notes. You can only rearrange the ones that already exist. Similarly, any lit major can tell you every story is a variation of the 5 major conflicts. Like a musician, writers can't invent ideas and themes. They have to work with the ones that already exist. Sure, Blade Runner 2049 explores themes that have appeared in other sci-fi films, but it takes existing ideas and presents them in a way that's unique to the story they're telling. That's all you could expect fiction to do. Children of Men didn't invent the sci-fi exploration of pregnancy and infertility. Those subjects have been discussed in other sci-fi stories, like Twilight of Briareus and Greybeard. The original Blade Runner may have been the first to bring the modern cyberpunk style to film, but it didn't invent the style. That style was a creation of Moebius. Even the story of Blade Runner wasn't an original screenplay. It was an adaptation of Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. And even though Philip K. Dick was a creative and prolific writer, his work was informed by the science fiction stories of H.G. Wells and the analytical psychology of Carl Jung. Every work of art you see is derived from something else. Quentin Tarantino's whole career is based off ripping off ideas from other filmmakers. But that's fine, because even though Tarantino is borrowing ideas from other filmmakers, he's representing those ideas in a fashion that's unique to his films.
Hey, do you think Juliet ripped off the aviators and leather jacket from Razorfist? They do kind of dress the same.
No, Juliet got her punk rock look from watching too much G.G. Allen. You know, now that you mention it, G.G. Allen and Razorfist are kind of similar. They both produce shit and throw it at their audience, but at least Gigi did it in an interesting way.
The circle jerk of Johnny-come-latelys descend from their fart huff and hoedown to condescend to my ass about the legacy of the original film and the merits of this sequel as a follow-up one more time? I'll open fucking fire, folks. Well, sure, Razor's seen the movie hundreds of times. Sure, he's repeatedly expressed the sentiment that it's been his favorite film since he had a favorite fucking film. Sure, he's got signed copies of the script, the Criterion and Director's Cut Laserdisc, the original 82 spinner. Sure, he bought props from the film, and yeah, he once claimed there was an entire year where every day after class he'd throw on the film, meaning in 1 year alone he saw it well in excess of 300 titty fucking times. Sure, he wrote a thesis on the subject, but hey, I just saw the final cut on Netflix 5 days ago. Better hip check this fucker into my whirlpool of wisdom. And that ain't me flexing my fanboy cock, folks. It's me establishing that I know Blade Runner.
This is the part of the video where Danny goes from being a man ranting about a film to a petulant child throwing a temper tantrum. He's doing that thing a 7-year-old would do. I have more Pokemon toys, so I'm a bigger fan. Homeboy here bought a signed copy of the script, and he's gonna talk to you like he wrote the fucking thing. Hey, if you want to be like Razor, you can go to Amazon right now and buy a copy of the script signed by Rutger Hauer.
It'll set you back $400 though. I don't know if that would make you an expert in Blade Runner or a fucking idiot who pisses money away.
Did you also notice he said he claims to have watched the movie every day for a year?
He once claimed there was an entire year where every day after class he'd throw on the film.
If he watched the movie every day for a year, why didn't he just say that? Why does he preface it with claim? That seems suspicious to me. It's like a Freudian slip. He's having a hard time of convincing himself of his own bullshit. Razorfist also mentions that while in college, he wrote a thesis on Blade Runner. A thesis that's conveniently nowhere to be found on the internet. I contacted Razor on Twitter and I asked him if I could read his thesis, to which he just ignored me. He didn't provide me with any links. If Razor is such a huge Blade Runner fan who knows the film so well, why wouldn't he enlighten us all by letting us read his thought-provoking analysis? Probably because if his thesis does in fact exist, it's an illegible pile of shit. Really, the biggest problem with Razor's video is he's incapable of reviewing Blade Runner 2049 on its own terms. Every criticism he makes towards the film relates back to the original movie. He doesn't like Ryan Gosling and Jared Leto because he thinks Harrison Ford and Rutger Hauer were better. He doesn't like the art direction because he thinks the art direction in the original movie was better. He doesn't even like the fact that the movie exists because in his mind, a sequel to Blade Runner is unnecessary. None of these issues relate to Blade Runner 2049 as a standalone movie. Sure, Blade Runner 2049 is a continuation of the Blade Runner story, but it's its own film and should be judged as such.
Hey, that's not fair, Reverend Paul. Razorfist is a self-proclaimed Blade Runner expert. He knows how to make a good Blade Runner movie.
Well, for shits and giggles, let's run down Razor's criteria that makes him a Blade Runner expert. First, he bought some movie memorabilia. In his own words, he claims to have watched the film every day for a year, and he wrote a thesis about Blade Runner that nobody else but him has seen, and we should just all take his word for it that it's awesome. These are the qualifications that make a Razorfist a Blade Runner expert. Hell, you wanna know what? I can play this game too. You see, I was a production artist for some comic books, I worked on some video games, and I wrote and illustrated some comic strips. Now, in the real world, all that amounts to is a pile of shit, but using Razor's logic, that makes me an expert in visual design and storytelling. So, in my expert opinion, Razorfist is wrong, and Blade Runner 2049 is actually a really great movie. People will argue over which film is superior, Ridley Scott's 1982 original or Denis Villeneuve's 2017 sequel. Honestly, from a pure storytelling aspect, I think Villeneuve's Blade Runner 2049 greatly surpasses Scott's original film. However, one cannot overlook the influence Blade Runner 1982 had on the landscape of filmmaking, and Ridley Scott's use of atmosphere and tone will forever be unmatched. But the beauty of being a fan is you don't have to choose, you could like them both. One doesn't have to be better than the other. Both films offer something unique to the audience, and you're really only spiting yourself if you have to play favorites.